I'm Ann Messerschmidt, the Environmental Resources Specialist with the City of Lakeville, and we're out here today on Valley Lake with our consultant, Steve McComas, the lake detective. Hi, Steve.
Good day, Ann, and thanks for inviting me out here again. It's always good to be on a lake or around a lake. We have had a chance, an opportunity to work on some of the lakes in Lakeville. And for the most part, if I had to just summarize, the lakes are in good shape. And on top of that, they're pretty stable, which means that they're not in a declining trend at all. In fact, the lakes seem to be either maintaining good water quality or even improving to a degree. And some of that is because of the projects that the Lakeville has sponsored. The environmental group, as well as the city in general, has been very proactive. We've been able to react, and we don't have to be so reactive. By that I mean we've been proactive to go out and do some projects that will help sustain good water quality. This is an example, Valley Lake. This, back in the 90s, had transparencies about a foot or less. And now the transparencies are well over 6 feet or more. And that's because of some of the projects we've done. It's been a combination of watershed projects and programs, as well as doing some things in the lake itself.
And one of the things we have been doing in the lake is putting in barley straw for a number of years,
Yes.
and as well as some other organic compounds to see if we can help reduce the algae. Do you want to talk a little bit about the barley straw?
Speaking of that, Valley Lake was one of the first lakes in the country to do a controlled program where we were monitoring and checking it. It started back in 1999. And since then, we've learned a lot about barley straw and how it can improve water clarity in lakes. And we think there's still a little bit of a mystery there, but we think we're zeroing in on some of the causes of just how it works. And we think it's because it takes out the phosphorus in the water column that controls algae growth.
I know it's been working pretty well here. We've got some good clarity, although we have had some other issues out here as well. Recently we had some Eurasian water milfoil enter the lake and kind of take over. Why don't you give them a little story about that Eurasian water milfoil?
That's right. That's an invasive, non-native species. And what happened is that by doing some sediment sampling, we found out there's a lot of nitrogen in those sediments. And that's one of the reasons why milfoil did so well last year. We're not sure if it's going to be a sustained, heavy growth like that, but for sure, last year we did a little bit of work, and this year we're doing some additional work to control Eurasian milfoil. Typically what happens with this invasive species, when conditions are just right, it'll grow and flourish, but then it'll settle back down to some type of a stable equilibrium condition as well.
Yeah, I know this year we had a bunch break off in the winter and come towards the surface, and even as we speak, they're over there removing the Eurasian water milfoil so that it doesn't root out and like it has, and then it sinks down and causes regrowth of the milfoil.
You know, in fact, Ann, we've learned a bunch. In fact, we solved one of the mysteries. Our lake mystery, I think, is regarding Eurasian milfoil. Last year, it was still growing up to the surface. The ice came on and actually kind of took it around and moved it around. This year, after the ice went out, there was still a lot of milfoil. But what we found is that the question was it going to all sink to the bottom or resprout and grow very vigorously? Turns out that it was semi-dead, but it was starting to re-root. It was growing little rootlets even on the floating branches. So by taking out the floating milfoil from last year, we're going to prevent that regrowth and should be able to get some control with a non-herbicide approach. That's one of the beauties too of having some long-term data sets like we do have on most of the lakes in Lakeville.
Well, I know you've worked for us for at least 10 years, maybe more, in various aspects.
Yeah.
And we've really gotten a lot of information about the lakes, and it's always interesting come the summertime as what's going on. And
every season presents a new mystery to be solved, and that's what makes this so exciting. Marion, Orchard, Lee Lake, and Valley Lake. Those are just four of a number of lakes in town that are all still in pretty good shape, pretty stable, and we know that from our long history of now sampling, where we can tell if something is going bad or not, or if it's just a one-year blip versus a long-time trend, and that's what we want to be able to be working with.
That's right. Now I know on Orchard Lake this year we're starting some aeration in the pond next to it.
That's right.
That's kind of an interesting thing. We do aerate here also at Valley Lake, but this is mainly to keep the fish going. But what are we doing at the pond and Orchard? Do you want to explain that?
Lakeville has started a new program. Again, one of the first that I know of where we're using aeration to break up an organic carbon phosphorus complex. By aeration and by moving the water around, we're going to break those bonds. And then what happens is that because there's so much of that water in this orchard, this little stormwater pond comes from a wetland system, there's a lot of natural iron in there as well. By aerating this water column, we're going to precipitate out the iron, which in turn will take the phosphorus. It's going to be a natural removal mechanism and will help protect Orchard Lake.
Yeah, it's a really big watershed that goes into that we're going to hopefully reduce a lot of phosphorus. So we're excited about turning that on.
That's right. Someday or shortly we'll be able to flip the switch.
That's
it's
right.
ready to go.
That's right. So that'll be starting soon.
That's nice. And you know, Lake Marion is another lake in town. Fortunately, that lake has been so stable, we haven't had to do a lot of reactive projects. We're pretty much monitoring it to make sure that if something does come in that we need to address, we're ready to go. But Lake Marion has been in pretty good shape.
So now Lee Lake, we got to do some exciting things out there last year. Do you want to tell them what we did out there?
Lee Lake's a nice lake. It's 25 acres. It's just big enough to really be managed. Versus sometimes a lake that's 600 or 700 acres can be pretty costly, and then if something doesn't work, then it's been a pretty costly failure. But Lee Lake, small enough to work with. One of the things we did out there is we put in alum. That seems to be very effective. Last year it was looking like an aquarium, and this year it's still holding up in pretty good shape. So that alum kind of experiment for controlling algae by way of controlling the nutrients seems to be working pretty well. So that's been a nice success story for the city.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. When we went out there, it just looked like a blanket of white underneath, and it held the sediments, and it was totally clear. And now the clarity is holding up better than it has before we had the alum.
That's right. And also not only the clarity, but also the nutrient levels are down as well.
Right.
So long-term prognosis, long-term maybe 3 or 4 years out anyway, looks pretty good.
So as we're approaching into the summer months, can you explain why it's good for residents to make sure they have all their grass clippings swept off their sidewalk and their driveways in the street?
Sure. Unlike barley straw, which is naturally low in phosphorus, which helps clear up lakes, grass clippings is actually naturally high in phosphorus. So when that grass ends up in the lake, that's going to be a source of phosphorus, which in turn will help algae grow. So not only grass clippings, but also even natural buffers along the shoreline are helpful too, like we have around Valley Lake, and we have in some other lakes as well.
Yep, the more algae in the water, the less water clarity, and the more problems it causes.
That's right. Not only for us, but also think about the fish.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Steve, for coming out and give us an update on our lakes, and we appreciate you coming and all the work you do for us.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be out here, and especially just be near a lake.
Absolutely. If you have any questions or are interested in any of the programs that we have the Lake Detective working on, please give me a call at 952-985-4528.